Hello, everyone. My name is Kenton Kavestu. I'm an ex-Googler, an ex-BCG consultant, and the founder of RocketBlocks, an online platform that helps candidates prepare for interviews. In this RocketBlocks mini lesson, I'm really excited because we're sitting down with Lenny Rachitsky. Lenny was recently a product lead at Airbnb, where he spent the last 7 years working on host quality, supply growth, and guest conversion. Before Airbnb, he actually was the co-founder and CEO of a company called LocalMind, which Airbnb acquired in 2012. In this conversation, we're going to talk about all things related to the craft of product management. So let's go ahead and jump in. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about marketplaces, because you've obviously spent a good chunk of your career as a product management leader at one of the biggest, most important marketplace companies around, Airbnb. And so I'd love to just hear your perspective on a bunch of different things there. But I want to start with just a very maybe deceptively simple question, which is, what comes first in marketplaces? Do you focus on supply? Do you focus on demand? I think technically you don't have a market until you have both sides. So you sort of need a little bit of both, but where do you spend your focus as a product manager building up one of these type of businesses?
Yeah. So with this experience I had at Airbnb, I actually started getting a bunch of questions from people about how to build marketplaces. And what I just realized is I didn't want to create this like sense that Airbnb's solution and answers were the way to do it, because it was just one experience. And so what I actually ended up doing is I did this really deep research project where I interviewed about 20 some people around 17 different marketplace companies, founders and early growth people, to figure out what works across all of the biggest marketplaces, not just Airbnb or Uber.
Yeah.
And so I have this like massive 8-part blog post series where I dive into all of the information I learned, and it actually ended up being very straightforward. There's kind of this like sequence that every big marketplace went through to build up their marketplace and get it kickstarted and then scaled.
Yeah.
And so one of the questions was, yeah, which side do you focus on? And so the simple answer is most often, so always you start with supply, because you need something on the shelves before people come to your store.
Yep.
So 100% of the time you should start with building up the supply side. Then there's like, okay, then what do you do after you have like a little bit of supply? And then what do you do later when you have meaningful amount of supply? So 100% of the time, just like start building up some supply. Then it turns out 80% of companies end up focusing on supply for a while. Essentially, they're supply constrained initially. And then eventually half and half are supply constrained versus demand constrained.
Okay.
And so as an example, so I talked to 17 different companies, and only 3 of them didn't focus on supply initially for a while. And the 3 were TaskRabbit, Rover, and Zillow.
Okay.
And the commonality across these, and this basically will tell you if you should be focusing on supply or demand, and it's most likely supply, is if supply is coming really easily, then most likely demand is going to be the problem. And the way that supply comes easily is if you can give your supply meaningful income that's like very flexible and not really hard. So as an example, Rover is this like dog watching marketplace where someone can just watch your dog.
Yeah.
And so their value prop to their supply is watch dogs for $50 an hour or a night, anytime you want, you decide. And so that's like, okay, great. Why would I not be a part of this thing if I just want to make some bucks?
Yeah.
And TaskRabbit was similar. It's like, put people's furniture together for like meaningful dollars and you decide when. So in both those cases, supply was not a problem. In most other cases, it is the main problem.
Got it. And so like, let's contrast that maybe against Airbnb, for example. In the early days, the implication would be that getting people to list their homes as like, hey, have a stranger come stay in your home for a night was
Exactly.
a real hurdle.
Exactly. And Airbnb is in the bucket of sometimes it's supply, sometimes it's demand at scale, like now. But initially it was still very supply constrained for that reason. It's like, what is this? What do you want me to do?
Yeah. It took a while for that to become like a new normal, I suppose.
Exactly.
And when you're building one of these marketplaces, what are some of the first signs that what you've got, what you're doing, that this market is actually working. Maybe, you know, on the quantitative side and just anecdotally.
So sign one is you've got one person that had a good time on both sides. And that's important. That's what makes marketplaces tricky is, say you're building, I don't know, a non-marketplace company, like, I don't know, Zoom. All you need is like us to have a good time, and that's it. And the business is in a good place. In a marketplace, you need both sides to have a good time. So an Uber, the rider and the driver. So most marketplaces fail because they can't even get to like a thing that anyone ever wants to use even once. So step one is you had one successful transaction where people used it and were happy. Then maybe step two is a few people had that and were happy. And then step three is that keeps happening and they keep coming back, essentially retention. So those are just signals that there's like some sort of product market fit from both sides of this thing. And then there's this, there's a VC, Sarah Towell at Benchmark, who actually just put out a really good post about this very question of kind of like the beginnings of a marketplace and what to look for. It's a post called The Hierarchy of Marketplaces that we can also put in the notes. And she frames it as you want to kind of optimize happiness and like create this like red hot center of happiness where it just kind of keeps going and people keep coming back and keep having a good time.
So are there any marketplaces you can think of where I like that idea of like you need obviously people to come together and have a good experience, and it's like a double gate. You're saying like the supply needs a good experience, the folks demanding that product or service need a good experience. Are there any marketplaces that have worked to some extent that you can think about where one side has a good experience and one is sort of middling, but they need that product or service so badly that it still works?
I don't think a marketplace will work if one side doesn't want to be on it and keep coming back. So I think the answer is just like by definition, no.
No.
Because they both need to want to come back to this thing. I think there's other reasons that they fail, even if they do have a great time, like they just don't need it often enough, or they find it once and they're done and we're good and we can move on.
Multiple people coming to the platform, both on the supply and demand side, and they're both ostensibly happy. Does that mean it will always work, or are there other signs that this is not going to work?
There's 7 or 8 things that I look for in a marketplace business, and I have another post that dives into all this stuff. But some of the more interesting ones is so 2 of them are like, so product market fit on the demand side. Like, do people really, really want this thing? So like Etsy, you know, how many people really want to buy antique, handcrafty goods? And then, and so that's 1. 2 is supply side product market fit. Do sellers on Etsy really want to sell these things? In their case, yeah, they do. And then, you know, Uber drivers, and then Airbnb hosts and Rover dog watchers. So those are 2. Then there's things like fragmentation. This is kind of what kills a lot of marketplaces, is how fragmented are both sides of the marketplace, and how hard is it for them to find each other without you. So a classic example is like airline marketplaces. You know, if you create a place to go find airlines to book, like it's not that much.
Plane tickets.
Yeah, for plane tickets. Yeah, like you can also just go to those other direct airline sites and book them. There's not that many.
Yeah.
And that's why those businesses are not like big businesses. They're usually just like kayak and stuff. They're just lead gen for other more profitable businesses. So fragmentation is something you look for, like an Uber. You're not going to like find a person to ride in their car on your own. You need them to find that person for you.
So super fragmentation is great.
Exactly. The more fragmented, the better, because that's why they need a place to go find each other. Another one that's kind of interesting is this idea of monogamy and non-monogamy, which is essentially, you come to the marketplace, you find what you're looking for. Do you ever need another one of those, or are you good forever? And the classic example is a therapist. Say there's a therapist marketplace. You go, you find your therapist, you love it. You're not going to come back in like the next week, month for another therapist unless it's a bad time.
Yeah,
then it's also a bad marketplace.
Things are really bad.
Exactly. And so then you're like, cool, I'm done. And so that's like a monogamous relationship that you're good for a while. And you can't really build a business on that kind of experience, because you spent all this time bringing someone to the site. They found what they were looking for. It's amazing. And they paid, and you took a little bit of a cut, but then they're never going to come back.
Yeah.
So that's something you look for. Yeah, there's a few others.
Yeah, that makes sense. How about like if you think about it from the product manager perspective, like if you are a product manager working on one of these marketplaces, you know, it could be Uber, or Airbnb, or Rover, any of these examples, are there certain things that you need to be much better at than say a PM working on a non-marketplace product, like a PM working on Zoom, for example, like you used earlier? Like, how does that mindset shift if you think it does, or does it not? Like, it's the same core skill set and you'll be fine.
I'd say in general, some marketplace founders kind of sometimes overthink the marketplace difference, like the fact that it's a marketplace versus just any type of business. And so one point is just like, don't overthink the marketplace, how different it is from other businesses. Like 90% of the reason you'll fail is not because it's a marketplace, but because all the regular reasons startups fail, which is usually people just don't want what you're building and they don't want to pay for it and they don't really need it and they won't come back. So I think that's like the core of this thing. But to actually answer your question, I think what's different about a marketplace, again, is that there's two sides. So there's multiple stakeholders you have to think about, and you have to find a place where they're both happy, where one isn't being super taken advantage of and they don't want to be a part of this thing.
Mm.
So I think what you have to be good at is trade-offs and empathy for both sides, and then finding a balance where they're both having a positive experience versus just like and this is something we struggle with at Airbnb, like, do we optimize the host experience or the guest experience, and which is more important to get right? And how do you balance these really tough decisions? And it's challenging.
Yep. Yeah. That is interesting. That I could see how like an acute focus on that balance of trade-offs would play into your daily sort of mindset in terms of the features you're prioritizing and the bugs you're fixing and, you know, overall strategy versus, say, if you're the PM for Zoom on video quality, it's just make it as good as it possibly can be.
Exactly.
You know, maybe server cost is the only other like trade-off against that, but
yep, so much easier.
Yeah. And then how about if you think about, okay, you're building up one of these marketplaces, it starts working. What's the difference in mindset for a product manager on the like aggressive build mode versus sort of maintain, once it gets some traction, like this thing is really working, like build versus maintain? Is there a big difference there, or all the same priorities still in place?
It's definitely different. The way I think about this is there's like the do things that don't scale phase of a startup, and then there's the scale the things that you're doing phase.
Okay.
And so again, I think this is more applicable as just any startup, not necessarily marketplaces. Initially, it's like be scrappy, just do things, move fast, break things, just make it work. And then later it becomes, create systems and processes and hire teams to work on things and think longer term. So it's often very different people that are excited about those different phases.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just like time to move on when the company's gotten bigger and not as scrappy and small as you used to like it.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely changes.
Can you think about it, or do you have an example of something either from Airbnb or another company where it's like they did something, maybe some PM or just a team led some initiative that was like, okay, this is really important to get things started to build this marketplace, but there's no way we're going to do it in the same fashion once it's at scale?
Yeah. So like the way we grew supply initially was like, ops and salespeople in markets calling, emailing people with homes, getting them on the platform, walking them through listing, telling them like, here's what kind of photos you want. Here's a title that's going to work probably. Here's a description. And then what you realize later is the ROI on that is not good at scale. Like you're spending, I don't know, thousands of man and women hours on helping people list their home, when really the lifetime value of that home on Airbnb is like $300. And so it just doesn't work as a LTV to CAC kind of question. But it's still important to do that early on, because otherwise you won't have any supply. And so you got to kickstart it and support it, and again, do things that don't scale.
Yeah.
But eventually becomes like a math formula. How much is this costing us? How much are we going to get out of it? And how do you productize and operationalize a lot of this stuff.
Interesting. So you guys actually had like people looking through a phone book or something and saying like, okay, we'll call X amount of people in this neighborhood and like literally walk them through the process of signing up.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of people don't think about this, but actually sales, like actual straight up old school sales, is the number one most used tactic for early supply growth in every marketplace. Like 60, 70% of marketplaces relied on that more than any other lever to get started.
Interesting. On a related note, what do you think? So sort of straight up sales tactic, great way to actually bring early supply on. What is the most unique user acquisition strategy, maybe on the supply side, and if you've got one on the demand side that you've heard of that actually worked? Like unique that didn't work, I'm less interested in, but unique that actually moved the needle, that would be interesting.
Yeah, there's a story I always think about that Breather used. This guy Julian Smith is the founder, and Breather is like an office space on demand start marketplace where you can book like a room for a meeting or a call or whatever, just all around the city.
Yeah, it's like
And
a
so
la carte, nice WeWork type thing,
yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. So we work by the hour. And so what Julian did, which I thought was really clever, is he used Twitter ads in a way that it wasn't designed to be used. So he basically set up a Twitter ad where he promoted his own tweet that said, hey guys, I'm launching Breather New York. If you want access like to the preview, just DM me. And what's interesting about that tweet is Twitter ads are generally meant for getting followers or retweets to kind of like build an audience, but instead he directed people to DM him, which is not normal.
Yep.
So he got like thousands of DMs and he manually had to go through them on the downside. But on the flip side, it was like such a good signal for the ad that people were engaging that it became like a penny per impression. It became super cheap. Like Twitter actually brought him into the office and asked him what he was doing that was working so well with this ad.
That's amazing.
They're very confused. And that basically, and then he just like walked all these people through this, I think it was 7 steps of onboarding onto Breather to use it. Just manually did this himself for like weeks. And that kickstarted the demand side of the marketplace just through that manual work.
Ah, interesting. So that's also another good example of like some super manual work that was done responding to thousands of Twitter DMs to build up a side of the marketplace. Okay, one last question on the marketplaces topic. How do you think through the problem of when does a marketplace that's started with one core offering like Airbnb, renting homes, Uber, getting a ride, when do you know, or how do you think about when you're ready to expand to some sort of ancillary offering?
So Airbnb went through this when I joined. So Airbnb started in 2008. I joined in 2012, and they were already trying to figure that out, partly because they were getting a lot of pressure, I think, from investors of like, when are you going to do Airbnb for dogs, Airbnb for boats, Airbnb for, I don't know, whatever else. And so trailers, yeah. So they went through that question themselves, and the way they approached it is Brian was away on like a vacation during the holidays, and he happened to be reading Walt Disney's biography. And in it, he kind of saw the way Walt Disney approached storytelling, especially the movie Snow White. Apparently, it was the first movie where they used storyboards to tell the story of an animated film. And so he was just like, hey, a trip on Airbnb is just like a story that unfolds. There's a beginning, there's a middle, there's an end. What are all the steps along the way of that journey? And so what he kind of was inspired to do is, let's storyboard out the trip of an Airbnb traveler and host to understand how much there is to this very simple use case that we're already solving and trying to make good. And it turns out there's so many steps along that journey that are not great at that point already for Airbnb, like the booking experience, the I'm out and about, what should I do, the telling your friends about the trip. And so what that helped everyone see is that there's actually so much depth to this very existing problem, and that they're nowhere near ready to like try a whole new problem yet. And that, yeah, and so that rallied everyone around like, let's just pick parts of this storyboard that we want to make amazing and put teams on each of those frames. So they're like key frames, and they hired a artist from Pixar to actually draw these storyboards.
Oh, wow.
And they like sat in the office in this really special place, and it became this whole thing at Airbnb. And that's actually the reason they acquired our company, to come back to that, is they had this like one frame of out in a city looking for things to do, and they wanted us to solve that problem basically.
Yeah.
So that's the way they approached it. And maybe to zoom out a little bit, what I find is it's the question of when should you layer on additional business units. Basically, I find it's usually later than you think it should be, because it's so easy to get distracted from like the thing that's actually working, and rarely does a company even find one thing that's working. And so you shouldn't assume you're going to find another thing and another thing. But that being said, the way, like the business theory of it is, you basically want to catch your business growth slowing down, and then start a new business that starts to sit on top of that and just layer the cakes of growth, so that growth overall continues to go at a healthy rate. So basically, like how you want to approach it is, when will growth slow down, and let's get started on this new thing way before that, so that by the time that slows, we will have this new thing growing. How do you know that? It's hard to predict. It's like a Harvard Business School class, probably. On this
but yeah, no, I mean, that makes sense. It sort of sounds like you're saying, like, you're looking at the growth of your core marketplace and trying to forecast out, maybe a year, 2 years, 3 years. And when that, starts hitting that top of that S curve, like,
exactly.
Okay, so how long do we need to build up some other business that will then keep the aggregate trajectory on, a nice steady clip?
Exactly. Easier said than done.
Yeah, I think much easier said than done. And I think that the focus part you mentioned about early on, just like making sure like you don't lose focus of the thing that's working, is important, because there's that critique that gets used in many different walks of life, but like, you're a one-trick pony, right? And I remember when I was at Google early on, that was often the critique, like, yeah, you're successful, but like all you do is ads. And we'll say, well, but yeah, it's like a pretty good trick, and it will work for it will work for a while.
You'll fund many failed attempts at other things.
Exactly.
Yeah. Two quick stories actually that on the same topic. So Rover actually went through something like this, where they kind of made the wrong choice. So Rover initially was just like dog boarding and dog like sitting.
Yeah.
And they always had this like, hey, we should do dog walking. That seems like a good idea. But they continued to like come back to, no, we just got to stay focused on this one use case. There's still so much room to grow here. But then WAG came around and did just that. And it turned out that's like a much better business, because it's more frequent. And they totally missed the boat on that. And then they had to end up, I think, merging with a competitor and then adding that later. So I think that's one of the cases where they waited too long.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. But I think usually it's the opposite. Usually people kind of get started too early and
maybe a mix of waiting too long and picking a smaller market to focus on, right? That's sort of
yeah. I think it's that. And I think with Rover, the thing that they pointed out is like, what's interesting with dog walking for them is it's exactly the same audience. Like they didn't have to like build a new market or a new, funnel, top of funnel. Basically, it's like the same people, and they could have easily just started to offer that without a huge amount of effort. And so they should have probably done that sooner.
Yeah.
In most cases, it's like very different. Like, Uber and Uber Eats, it's like a different problem and job to be done. And so it's not as obvious. But
Great. I hope you enjoyed that snippet from my conversation with Lenny. Thank you so much for watching. We have a ton of great content coming out on both the product management and consulting career paths on a weekly basis. So if you haven't subscribed yet already, please do so. There is a big button on screen right now, and if you click that, you'll get all of our content as soon as it comes out. So thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.